Michigan didn't have the best, but it didn't have the worst transfer portal situation over the course of the weekend. They got 2 commitments, but then they struck out on some of those names that everyone has been kind of waiting for. But I'm here to tell you it is not the dire situation that many of you on the message boards believe it to be. It's certainly not ideal, but things can and will likely turn around for Michigan. Here's why I'm not worried as far as the rest of the transfer portal. We'll talk about it here on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of WolverinesWire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Hopefully we have working video today. That was my fault on Friday for using a memory card that was on its way out. It has officially died, I think, because I go to import the video from my camera and it's like, yeah, no, there is no video. Well, it said that there was a file, just no video. That's the back end of things sometimes. So Michigan lost out on a couple guys that people really thought that they were going to get, myself somewhat included, but not necessarily fully. You saw Skylar Bell ends up sticking with UConn. I'll explain that momentarily. Yale wide receiver David Pantelis goes to Stanford, and Fa'amo Fa'alili ends up going to Wake Forest following his position coach from Washington State. That in and of itself should kind of tell you just kind of where that's at. But they did get 2 commitments. They got Lawrence Attar from Wayne State. He's from Dearborn. Not every FCS school is Wayne State, even though I'm kind of thinking that way. I'm just making sure I'm not missing something here. Doesn't look like it. And they also lost, or they got rather, why am I blanking on who else they got? They got a second one. They got, Trey Williams from Clemson. So that is good news for Michigan. They did get their defensive tackle. I think that is just as good of a pickup as David Gusta, who ended up going to Kentucky. So Michigan's got a really strong defensive tackle rotation right now, assuming Rayshawn Benny comes back, which I fully expect him to. You've got Damon Payne, you've got Trey Williams, you've got Rayshawn Benny, you've got Trey Pierce, who started in the game against Alabama and played really well, in my opinion. You got Ike Awuna, assuming he comes back. And you also have, Etta and any other younger players who could step up. So that rotation, no, it's not the same as Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, but you can make do with that, especially with Derek Moore and TJ Guy. TJ Guy still, again, having to finalize his decision, but it sounds like he's coming back. That is an absolute monster of a defensive line. Depending on if they might be flexing Jayshawn Barham. We'll see if that ends up happening, but right now, I like what Michigan's defense is. But that's not where a lot of the questions lie, right? Because they did get the offensive guard in Lawrence Attar from Ferris State. Finally said it correctly. And I think that is big. I tried to look it up on PFF, and it said no snaps in 2024. That was incorrect. He played 15 games. He's a behemoth, 6'5", 330 pounds. You look around, you see his coach saying things about him that makes you feel pretty good. You think that Michigan's not just going to take lower level guys if they don't feel like they can't contribute at the higher level, right? You see that in the NFL all the time. I know that there's certainly people are going to, kind of be like, I don't know about that and all that stuff. I think if that's a wide receiver, then maybe you question things a little bit more, because we've seen Michigan take some lower level wide receivers, CJ Charleston, and does not have the same type of production. Dalen Baldwin as well. But you see those players tend to do pretty well when they do get called up, and he's got the body type for it. So that's exciting to think that they've got some players that they were in on that we didn't really hear about Trey Williams until a couple days ago. We didn't hear at all about Lawrence Attar until that happened. And so Michigan's got some help there, that he may very well be the replacement for Josh Preeb, since Josh Thompson ended up going elsewhere. So that is good. You kind of look at your offensive line and say it's getting pretty close to being finalized. If not finalized, they'll work all those things out in spring ball. And you look at what they've got. And I forgot to mention Nathan Afobe in the podcast. I forgot at the top. It's both Samaj Morgan and Nathan Afobe. Not looking at a roster when I'm putting this together. I'm going off of my just my mind grapes there. But I think that you've got a lot of candidates that can make that offensive line pretty good. And you hope that if Giovanni El-Hadi stays, that he has a bounce back year, considering he was a lot better when he was doing the fill-in in 2022, or was it? Yeah, 2022 than he was as a starter. So you hope that can work out. And but obviously the name of it all is some of those players who are still out there that they want to get and need to get. But I would caution you to not be overly reactive. It's kind of funny seeing these meltdowns, and especially with Lily Famo going to Wake Forest. It's like, okay, come on, like seriously, we're losing recruits to Wake Forest. Yeah, because he's just following his position coach. He wanted a place that felt like home. It's not everything's going to be a big NIL play. Not everything is going to necessarily depend solely on the Michigan brand and all of that stuff. Sometimes guys are going to want to play with the guys that recruited them, play for those guys. And that just is how it's going to work out from time to time. But Michigan's done a very nice job with the 10 commits that it has at this point. It's found positions of need. And yeah, understand that wide receiver is a glaring position still. All of the eggs were in the Skylar Bell basket. And ultimately, it comes down to just where he's at in his academic progression, in terms as it goes with getting a degree and all of that stuff, and Michigan, right? Because Michigan's not going to let a guy come in for a semester and get a Michigan degree. That's just not going to happen. I was kind of enlightened on that from some people over the course of being down in Tampa. And there's people who are going to sit there and say, well, they should take. No, that's just not going to happen at Michigan. They don't want someone to go to Wisconsin and UConn and then come in for a semester and then have one semester of work at Michigan and say, here's a Michigan degree. That's just not going to happen. So unfortunately, it doesn't work out. And Michigan will look at other options. Skylar Bell was atop their wide receivers. David Pantelis, we don't know exactly where Michigan stood as far as how much they wanted him. Him going to Stanford shows you that he's a high academic guy and probably not necessarily an NIL play either. But there are still other options on the board for the Wolverines. And I think that whether these are the guys that they end up, trying to bring in ultimately, or if it ends up being someone else, we'll get to all of that here in just a moment. But before we do, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. So here's the thing. You can go around and you can look and see all of the spreads and everything. I know you guys want to know Detroit Lions. We don't know who they're playing yet. We got to wait on that because they got a bye week because they beat the Vikings. It's wonderful. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so I have much less concern. Maybe it's because I've talked to people in the building as far as who they end up getting at wide receiver. I am heavily intrigued by Kaedin Robinson from Appalachian State. He was also at UCF. I erroneously it was a weekend of errors in articles. It happens. Apparently, I don't know how to read dates. I had erroneously said he had an overlap year with Chip Lindsey. Apparently, I just don't know how to read dates, like I said. But he was there the year before at UCF and ends up going to App State, their number one receiver. I'd rather have him than anyone else on the board. Obviously, they were enamored with Skylar Bell. But Kaedin Robinson is probably one that's going to take a lot, right? Like now, can Michigan make an NIL play maybe better than anyone else when it comes to a wide receiver? Yes. But he's a guy that's he's had 800 yards this last year, 900 the year before. He's a big target. He's a guy that kind of does everything. He's led the team in receiving each of the last 2 years. So yes, Kaedin Robinson would be at or near the top of my wide receiver board. and we'll see if they're able to make a move there. Troy Stellato from Clemson hasn't necessarily had a ton of production, was a relatively high-rated 4-star, and didn't really crack it at a Clemson team that tends to throw the ball. I mean, it runs as well. It's got the same kind of balance, but certainly could be a guy that could help out. He's down to Michigan, West Virginia, and one other school, which evades me at the moment. So, I mean, those are your options at the moment. One of them is really intriguing. One of them not necessarily quite as much so, but at the same time, I think that number one, I'm not that worried because I think that they'll find somebody. You've got not only this portal time, but you've got the spring portal. But let me say this. Number one, there's that mystery receiver who's out there. I don't know if he's entered, if it was on a playoff team that just got eliminated, or if it's one that is still playing. I have no idea. But just let some of these things play out. Michigan's been working on some of these things. And multiple people have reported that the phones have been ringing off the hook for the Wolverines about players that want to come, especially skill position players that want to come play with Bryce Underwood, right? Like Michigan is not going to roll out there with what it just had. And I understand you've kind of got the trade, essentially, that got finalized, Donovan McCulley for Tyler Morris. McCulley, I think, had a little bit more success as a wide receiver than Tyler Morris did. Morris had a probably higher potential. You've got your freshman, Andrew Marsh, Jacob Washington, who had the All-Star game, and I still think is an early enrollee, if memory serves, and as well as the big body Jamar Browder. But I don't think that they're just going to roll out with Kendrick Bell and Peyton O'Leary and say, we're good, right? I don't think that they're going to do that. And I understand that a lot of the names that have been out there have been ones that haven't ended up in Ann Arbor. But I tell you this with an informed opinion, not necessarily giving you names because I don't have them, but based off of having information in terms of speaking to people that are the ones that are orchestrating all of this. Like, just have some faith. Understand, I understand that it is the human impulse to want to follow every single nuance and follow every single moment of every single day and gauge where your team is in the offseason based off of that. But it's kind of the same thing as like we've talked about before when we're sitting there like trying to kind of figure out what the recruiting class is going to be. And you're freaking out in April and May only for June and July to be the time when they get a bunch of commitments. There's still plenty of people on the board. There's more people that are going to enter the fray. And Michigan's going to they're not just going to, they're not just desperately looking for any wide receivers that's going to be out there to help them, right? They're just not going to do that. What they are going to do is try to make sure that they get the right guy to come in that's going to fit the culture, fit the system, fit all of those things. And in some ways, they are looking for diamonds in the rough. And I wouldn't be surprised, though, if there is a bigger name that ends up in Ann Arbor. Just kind of based, again, off of conversations that I had. So I just urge you, if you're one of the people that's melting down and sitting there saying, like, we're striking out on guys that are going to Stanford, or we're striking out on guys who are going wherever, there have been very few highly productive guys out there to begin with. A lot of it's been potential. You look at, like, a Dane Key, had, like, 700 yards, and I know that was a name, or a Zachariah Branch, who's really underachieved beyond being a freshman kick returner. And obviously came at a very high price. Michigan's going to find the right guy that's going to work out for what they're trying to do. And I fully expect that they're going to be able to get someone that is going to make everybody feel a lot better, probably before spring, but certainly the spring window is nothing to scoff at. It is when it comes to quarterbacks, right? Like there were no quarterbacks available last spring that you sit there and say, oh, yeah, that's going to fix everything. That there just were not that Michigan was going to bring in. Skill position players can be a different story. And I think that you just kind of need to relax a little bit and understand that sometimes these things take time. There's no deadline here. You want to get a guy enrolled and get someone into classes, and those are starting or have started or whatever. But they're not isn't necessarily this massive rush to just get names in. Because they do have keep in mind, Channing Goodwood and Marion Stewart should be productive next year. Usually you count on second-year guys as well, right? So they've got options. No, it's not like this wide receiver room that you're looking at and saying like, man, yes, that's what they can roll with that. But I fully believe that they will find a way to get some guys based on, again, off of these conversations I've had, not to have this circular conversation with you, but the idea that they're just indiscriminately striking out is just not true. Now, Skylar Bell, that is a big loss. That is someone that they desperately wanted. Could things change in the spring? I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody since I was in Tampa. But certainly he was a guy that they really, really, really wanted. And I'm sure that they're going to find someone else. And I'm sure that they have other people. And when I say I'm sure, I don't mean that speculatively. I know that they have other people who are on their radar who absolutely have expressed interest in eventually coming to Ann Arbor. Whether that comes to fruition or not, we'll see. All I know is whenever I've heard stuff like that, it was like, hey, Justice Haynes kind of wants to end up in Ann Arbor, according to his agent. Okay, so that's just kind of how things go sometimes, especially with this transfer portal. It's a different scenario than it's ever been. This is full-on unfettered free agency in ways that you just can't fathom. So sit back, relax. Do not sit there and flip out over potential misses and what have you, and understand that this will look different. I mean, even the team that is currently fielded could look different, right? Michigan lost guys coming out of spring ball that no one expected. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but because it is unfettered free agency, you are going to see some of that kind of happening. Michigan's done a really good job keeping its own roster. And yes, there are a ton of guys who have left, guys who mostly have not played, but having Bryce Underwood in that room has made a huge difference. One person told me that he is the biggest recruiting chip that they have as far as retaining their own roster, because guys saw Bryce Underwood in practice and are like, oh yeah, no, I want to play for that. I want to play with him. So that's the good news. So all of that said, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about 2025 and where things go. We'll do that here in just a moment. But before we do, attending the new 12-team college football playoff games, it's an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of the last 3 years in the college football playoff and can't wait to make new memories with the updated format and the extra teams involved. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I used Game Time Picks to find tickets for an upcoming game. I'm going to actually try to do that with the Lions, I think, with the playoffs here. Browsing through the deals was a breeze, and I found great value for all kinds of seats around the venue. The Super Deal in particular stood out as the best value for the event. So I love that I could see the seat views before buying, and that the app shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, the one on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I'm going to audible from what I said we were going to talk about. So I did kind of want to factor in the two new additions and start going through, not necessarily the depth chart. We kind of did that on Friday, but I've kind of changed my mind and decided that I want to talk a little bit about the college football playoff, thanks to the ad read, just spurring up a conversation I had earlier today. I'm going to go on record and tell you that I hate the 12-team playoff. You could convince me of 8, and you could convince me of that, and I could live with it. And I understand the top 4 seeds all lost and once they finally got to play. But if you're having 12 teams, and really there's only been one competitive game the whole time, I mean, I guess 2. Georgia Notre Dame was relatively competitive, but Notre Dame pretty much controlled that game. I would venture to say that your playoff is way too big. And I understand, like we went through at one point in time, all of the semifinal blowouts in the 4-team, right? That was a pretty regular occurrence. You usually didn't have really stellar semifinals. Almost all of them were blowouts. Almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all. But I still like the 4-team, and I'll tell you why right now. Because it was something special. It was exclusive. You had very little room for error, right? If you're Ohio State, you can't lose to unranked Michigan and say, well, we're still playing for things. Like, no, you're done. You're out. Welcome to your New Year's Six bowl game or whatever it is. Lower tier than the college football playoff. Like it required a level of perfection that now currently doesn't exist, right? Ohio State has 2 losses. They avenged one of their losses, but like that loss to Michigan would have been the death knell. Now, this isn't only about Ohio State, right? Michigan was in the same territory in 2016, having lost to Iowa, unranked team, 6-6 type team, and losing to Ohio State. Michigan in 2016 would have been in this particular playoff, especially with some of the wins that it had: Colorado, Wisconsin, Penn State. But I can argue for 8, but I miss the exclusivity, right? Because you knew like this was a grand prize to be won, and just to make it to the Final Four meant something. Right now, we're not talking about the Final Four of this playoff in the same way that we were the previous. And it's, to me, it just went too big too fast. I don't like this multiple, right, we've already had 2 waves of playoff games and still have 2 more before the champion's crowned. I would feel a heck of a lot better if you did more of an 8 team and just started it with what we saw on New Year's Day. And, if you want to do it earlier in the year, like those first rounds were, I would be fine with that. And then let the loser go off and have their have their bowl game. Let them have a bowl game, because it also bothers me in a lot of ways that like Indiana they finally get to a playoff, right? Like they're so far outside of the college football elite. They play well enough, go 11-1. Certainly could have, depending on ranking, depending on teams beaten. Obviously, they hadn't beaten anyone other than SEC champion Michigan, but. Nonetheless, the fact that their reward was to go play at Notre Dame at the beginning, essentially, of December. What was it, December 13th? And promptly just go home and just be done. I think that's unfair in a lot of ways, right? Like I would have loved to have been able to see them play. And granted, that would have hurt Michigan's bowl game, right? They probably would have fallen into a lower tier bowl game, playing in the Pinstripe Bowl or, heaven forbid, here in Detroit. But I would rather see teams like that still get their typical bowl game reward in the same way that like a team that plays in a conference championship game still gets their, and loses, just gets to go to the postseason. Maybe that's just the price of it all. But that's what I would change. I would make it 8 teams. And I mean, certainly you still are going to get a lot of that revenue, right? Like maybe it's not as high because they're not, playoff games. But then the playoff is still a little bit more exclusive, right? At 8 teams, the loser of that first round gets to go off and play in like a New Year's Six bowl or whatever, probably against another one of those teams or something like that. Or maybe like a team that was just out there, just got out, right? Like Alabama was this year. And they still get to have an upper tier chance to go and play. I think that would be a lot better. And then the playoff is going to be at least still somewhat exclusive. 8 teams, I think, is still too much. I think 4 was great. You can convince me of 6 because then you could give the top 2 buys and still kind of go through it. And then you don't have the extra bowl games. But I think that if you want to keep games and you want to keep exclusivity and make the regular season matter, then 8 teams is what it is. Like, here's the ridiculous thing is, yeah, all the pro leagues have it like this, where you can lose a couple times in the season. Like the Lions went 15-2. They lost to the Bills and they lost to the Buccaneers. It could have been different. It could have, or let's say they would have lost yesterday to the Vikings. They lost to one of their divisional rivals and still get a chance to play in the playoffs. But do we really want college football to become like the pros? No, we love college football because it's not the pros. Right? Like, I still love the Lions, but I don't want Michigan to be in similar situations as the Lions, right? Like, I don't want it. I want it to be what college football has been. I miss the idea of being able to wake up on New Year's Day and have like too many games to even watch, right? Like, makes your head spin in the same way that a Saturday could, a regular college football Saturday. Like, you got to try to figure out, but there's bigger and better matchups. Instead, we're relegated to seeing a lot of just absolutely, asinine bowl games where it's instead of it being like a brand name versus a brand name, it's like, you know, you've got a brand name versus an also ran quite often. Some of that's because some of these teams haven't lived up to their standard, right? Like Florida. I don't know who Florida played, but it was no one exciting, you know, on December 20th or whenever it was that they played. But we're losing a lot of what college football is. And some of it, like, okay, there's going to be a lot of changes with NIL, right? Like, that's why you're going to see a Boise State or an SMU or an Arizona State being able to rise up, right? But I want to see a little more consistency in the name brands before we are pitting them against other teams. Two of those played against Penn State. One of them actually had a tough game against Texas. Still, how many of you really were like, oh, man, I just can't wait to see this matchup between Texas and Arizona State. I can't wait to see this matchup between Penn State and Boise State. Those were second round playoff games. Those were quarterfinals. I couldn't care less about them, right? So, okay, great. Let's fast forward to this upcoming week, right? Thursday and Friday, Ohio State, Texas. Yes, please, give me that. Notre Dame, Penn State, give me that as well. Why are we watering down the product just strictly for ad revenue? It is unbelievable, and college football needs to reverse course. It won't, because greed is always going to trounce everything else in front of it. But I urge those who can make those decisions to say, you know what, enough's enough. Let's scale this thing back. Let's make this thing a little bit more relevant instead of it being kind of a free-for-all, right? So I had to at least say that piece. So anyway, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Hopefully the video works. Using a better memory card now. Anyway, we'll talk to you again on Tuesday. Peace.